All right, let's move on with the checkup here. Lord of the Rings. We're getting new movies. We had the show on Amazon, Rings of Power. It had positive, I guess, critical reception, but in terms of like drawing in the everyday fan, I think it sort of struggled. If you were a committed Tolkien fan, I think it did what it had to, and we're going to get a lot more of it going into the future. But we have movies on the way from Warner Brothers. Ricky Flex, I don't know what to say because it felt like you're already taking a risk with the show and the legacy of the trilogy. The Hobbit already kind of like messed with the legacy of Peter Jackson's original trilogy, even though he directed The Hobbits 1, 2. Like, what can this do to kind of make you say, like, this is a good idea? Like, this is something where it's not going to tarnish the legacy, where it can only help it or just not really harm it that much. Because we live in an age of, I mean, what spinoff can we make? What sequel trilogy can we do? You know, what, like, this isn't Star Wars. It has prestige upon it. And Lord of the Rings, it's losing it with these shows, these spin-offs. We already had The Hobbit. Like, what are your thoughts on Lord of the Rings films coming?
These aren't going to be reboots, right?
I don't know. I think the idea of a reboot was pitched when they were trying to shop the show.
That's what I remember that, but I thought those got shut down pretty quickly. That's why I would be shocked if they didn't do a reboot with the show. Why would they do reboot with the movies just 20 years later?
And man, I don't think you can reboot the movies because you're just gonna have constant comparisons to these Oscar level films. Like,
Yeah.
what do you think they're gonna do? Do you think they're gonna have spin-offs of certain characters potentially?
I don't even know how you do that. Like, they met their ending. You know, I really, that's why I don't like this news. I think it's way too early. I think it's only 20 years after Return of the King. And we had 3 Hobbit movies, for God's sakes. And we just started up this show. It's $500 million.
Yeah.
So and it's on Amazon, like Amazon. So I'm really skeptical. I'm not liking this. And it's a Warner Bros. Project. So that's tough for me to say. I'm on their side for most things recently. Like DC, you're thinking HBO Max. I've been on their side with the cost cuts. I think they're doing a very wise job taking off IP from HBO Max that's not being watched. Like I'm liking what the management hierarchy's doing, but this just seems like we're grasping at things that shouldn't be grasped. You know, we should let things breathe, especially because I did watch Rings of Power. The back third of it really came together. Definitely took way too long. But I am a full blown believer in season 2. I'm a full blown believer in season 2. I cannot wait for season 2. I think that has definitely a lot more potential now versus the beginning of season 1. But now it's like we're thinking of these Lord of the Rings films. Like, are they going to expedite them so they're this decade? Hopefully, like my hope is they're announcing these films. They're not reboots. Maybe I didn't read any of these stories. I know the Hobbits and then Lord of the Rings, obviously. Hopefully there's like stories that we just have no idea that are in the books for someone that didn't read the books that they could just like make a trilogy off of that could be awesome and totally separate. That would be kind of cool. I don't know what that would be, but you got to make it unique. You got to separate yourself and it's got to look good. The Hobbit, a big criticism is that it doesn't look good, especially compared to the natural effects of the original trilogy. So I think that's another aspect where that's going to be a lot of money filming on set, and you got to have the right person behind it. So there's so many aspects here at play, so much confusion, a lot of moving parts. They got to take their time. I don't want to see a Lord of the Rings movie till like 2030.
I feel like the source material is so important with Lord of the Rings. People that are Tolkien heads, they are analyzing the show Rings of Power to death. Every single frame they are judging, every character that's introduced, they're saying if it's accurate or not. Like, if there aren't stories to be told outside of like almost like a sequel to Lord of the Rings and what we've gotten, because we've only gotten prequels with like The Hobbit and now Rings of Power. If we continue these stories, are these stories already available like you're talking about? And if you are going to continue some of these characters, you got to handle with so much care. You got to be talking to anyone who is associated with the Tolkien estate, how is the best way to honor these characters? Because we know they care a lot about them. I'm actually shocked that they agreed to do these movies. I think that the way I would approach it is, I guess, spin-offs of just like, let's see Strider or like Aragorn when he is king. Let's say something there is a war that he has to engage in. Maybe it doesn't require the entire realm. Maybe it's just like Gondor and he has to go, right? And he has to lead into battle. Or maybe it's a Legolas type of journey, all right? Or a Gimli. Just give me a spin-off or a solo adventure from these. It's almost like the reversal of what we saw with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Instead, you're starting at with everyone coming together, and now let's see where they go afterwards, right? When they go their separate ways. It's almost like a splintering of the group that came together, and we see what they're doing 20 years later, okay? Or maybe they have kids, and it's a mentor-mentee type of role. That could be a possibility too. Is this something I'm dying to see? No. It only could cause like a disruption, I think. Like, I don't think the payoff is going to be enough where it's worthwhile to make these movies. Know what I mean?
I think that's the key. I think the payoff, what you're gonna get, is only gonna diminish the legacy, the reputation of this IP. And I think that's something where the kids and the family of Tolkien, they're very protective of. And I think they already think it's being tarnished or harmed right now with the show, with the Hobbit trilogy. I think that they already think that, and they're like hanging on. Definitely, it's a very strong IP. Besides Star Wars and comic books, it's probably the biggest IP out there. Yeah, probably, and it's the best trilogy of all time for most people. So I think that's what they gotta hold on to. Sometimes, like you gotta just think of creative ways, or just let things breathe more. Think of more creative ways rather than just spin-offs of great characters who are now getting older. You can't just recast Legos again. I think that's like a big problem where we're just gonna be recasting, and then are we gonna be doing this for 20 more years? Just like focus on Lord of the Rings content. We haven't even rebooted Star Wars, Luke Skywalker. So we're gonna already be rebooting or doing spin-offs off of Aragorn 20 years later versus Star Wars is like 40 years. I don't think that's the answer.
And then you're looking at potential recasting of certain characters. What if like a Viggo Mortensen doesn't want to come back? What if he doesn't want to play Aragorn again? And if you do a prequel of him, are you going to have an actor that actually lives up to what Aragorn brought to the table, Viggo Mortensen brought to the table? You know, there's just so much pressure with films. Like TV is one thing, a prequel story, even prior to The Hobbit, about characters we're somewhat familiar with, Tolkien fans are very familiar with. It's just a risk that's unnecessary. Let's just do something new. Let's do something original, or let's pick a different series of books. There are so many books out there with amazing stories to tell. Let's not dive back into this pool just because it's going to make you money, but rather you can make something special. But we don't live in that day and age.